I'd like to warmly welcome our special guest and friend of mine. He's a blockchain entrepreneur. His name is Nikitas Kokorelis. He's based out of Portugal. He's the co-founder of numerous blockchain projects based out of Portugal and other parts of Europe. Some are in stealth mode, some are not. He's also the head of sales at BridgeIn. And now this is a company that actually helps tech companies, blockchain companies in particular, set up and expand into the European market. So for today's episode, we're going to dig into the importance of Portugal in the blockchain ecosystem. Now, there's a lot of great things going on in all parts of the world, but I think when it comes to Europe, I think people really need to understand what Portugal's significance and place in that is. So, Nikitas, welcome. Thank you so much for coming on to our show today.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you talking about this. I understand that Portugal is a bit far away from the US in this topic, so for sure I'd like to give you some insight on what's going on here, in particular in Portugal in general, in Europe as well.
Yeah. All right, well, starting there, so what makes Portugal a good place to, A, invest in cryptocurrency and or even create a cryptocurrency blockchain startup over there?
Great question. So I think you got right to the point. The thing is, for a lot of years now, the Portuguese government has made an option of not taxing these kind of financial assets. So the gains you
Right.
get from them, they're absolutely free. It's not something that has been caught up in the system, that it's not been looked after. It's exactly the contrary. So the government
Right.
has looked at this starting. I would give you an example, the best one probably. Forex, for example, gains, they haven't been taxed, never.
Right.
So the idea of cryptocurrency belonging to the same class of assets it's absolutely this one. So no tax, bring investment in, and welcome all foreign investors to actually relocate to Portugal. This applies for individuals and for companies, by the way. In practical terms, what this would mean is if you make gains from any trades you make, they're absolutely tax-free.
And that is, and by the way, I'd like to introduce our CEO, Chris Abadi.
Hey, how you
Nice to
doing?
meet you, Chris.
Sorry, I'm a little late. Just
No worries.
had something going on, just ran in the door. But
No
thanks
worries.
for joining us today. I'm sorry I missed the first few minutes, but I'm excited to hear what you were about to get into. So
we literally just started. So we're
Okay.
talking about why Portugal is important. Portugal does not tax capital gains. And, Chris, you and I riff about this all the time,
Jesus,
why
that's
that is
awesome.
particularly important, especially in contrast to what's going on here in the United States. The IRS is scrambling to figure out the best way to tax cryptocurrency gains, whether it's in Bitcoin or whether it's in anywhere else. So, Chris, we're talking about why Portugal is particularly important. And that is one of its major advantages. The capital gains that people will make on, let's say, the increase in value in Bitcoin, for instance, which we've all seen this week, that goes right into your pocket. Once you decide to, let's say, withdraw it from your, I guess you could say, your quote unquote brokerage account with whatever cryptocurrency platform. And Nikitas, what made you get into cryptocurrency and blockchain in the first place? I always feel that everybody kind of has a little bit of a story where kind of like a switch flips on, like a light switch flips on, and then I think everybody kind of ends up having their own journey, into this space.
Sure. So we discussed this before in our previous talks. I think mainly because the traditional investments, whether it being through banks or bonds, whatever we discuss, they, as time goes by, they tend to be less attractive. So for me, and telling you a bit about my story, back in 2019, I started working in the US. I started a conversation a bit early in 2018, and that's when I got kind of exposure to this cryptocurrency world. And we started investing in multiple coins. And from there, I think just things naturally took their course, and here we are.
Awesome. And lately, as of now in October, how has business been at BridgeIn? Do you find that a lot of American or other overseas companies are scrambling to get into Portugal now?
Yeah, for sure. For the past months, it has been crazy. Not only for, I would say, not only for cryptocurrency purposes, but the thing is, COVID helped a lot. People's gain perspective over where they were living, how they were working, what was the kind of framework. And
Right.
Portugal has a lot of good things to offer. So not only tax-wise, as we discussed before, but the actually cost of living is really attractive for U.S. Citizens.
Right.
And it always, like, thinking about bridging, and that's what we'll be doing, is we're bridging the North American continent to Portugal and to Europe as a gateway to further expand your business here. And that's kind of what we're offering. So stable democracy, really safe. We rank like third in the last index, the global index. So I think it's a no-brainer. That's why we're seeing so many Americans relocating to Portugal.
That's awesome. Now, I know you were involved in a few, I would actually say numerous projects. And like I mentioned, some in stealth mode, some not. Are there any specific projects you'd like to talk about for a little bit?
For sure. So we are focusing basically in two things. This is very objective to what problems we find in Portugal and the ones that we want to kind of overcome.
Right.
And this is mainly bureaucracy, which is really hard to go around with. We're trying to develop smart contracts so that we can work around that. So if just give you an example and to give a bit of context on what we're discussing here, if you think of like HelloSign, DocuSign, those kind of e-signature platforms, this is something it's really hard to use in Portugal. So that's how back we're standing in terms of all of this. So that's one. And the second one is blockchain brought to us a really cool thing, which is we could try work around the corruption that we have in the system as well. So that's a second point of interest that we're trying to explore. And that's what I'm able to say today to you guys.
Right. And no worries. And those are, I think, one of the major benefits of blockchain in of itself is the amount of transparency that it brings, and also it's unalterable effectively. So I think for any country, first, second, third world country, democracy or otherwise, this is going to be something that will help a lot of people regardless. And I want to know, Bitcoin has been extremely bullish these past 2 weeks, to say the very least. And some people speculate, some of the reasons behind that. So we're looking at, Bitcoin, which was effectively over 65,000 US dollars per coin. What are your thoughts behind, some of this, and do you think that Bitcoin is going to plateau, or do you think it may even actually go over 100,000?
No, so yeah, for sure, above 100,000 and maybe much more. Like I've seen a really interesting clip this week about that. For me, it's really easy to understand how and why it's going up consistently, even though it has its ups and downs, of course.
Right.
Which is, and going back to the clip, I was looking at the adoption rate for the internet back in the day, right?
Right.
And the thing is, Bitcoin and cryptocurrency adoption rate is crazy when you compare it to the internet rate adoption. And the thing is,
that's actually a very good point. Yeah.
If you see what happened with the internet, and if you go back to the beginning, right, like where people didn't know what a website was, and when you compare it, like the percentage was around 30% back then. So year on year, that was the growth. When you look at cryptocurrency, it's about 130%, which means it more than doubles. So if you think of if this plays out for a couple of years, which it will, as it gains more importance in most sectors,
yes,
well, you can see what's going to happen. So that's where I stand.
Yeah. To be fair, I would say you're highly bullish on the success of of blockchain and in Bitcoin. And you know, you know, we've had this discussion on other episodes as far as the success of applying blockchain to society as a whole. So right now we're seeing both the positives and negatives of, let's say, what El Salvador is going through.
Mhm.
And my personal feeling is, I think whether it's a first world, second or third world country, there is going to be a little bit of a learning curve at first, because it doesn't seem like I think we're getting there, but most people have not, became most people have not become comfortable with blockchain and Bitcoin and kind of the philosophy and I guess the technology and what it's all about. Now, with Portugal not taxing capital gains, what would you say the average Portuguese person is like if you were to, let's say, maybe go to Lisbon, or one of the
Mhm.
other major cities over there, and you were to like talk with somebody at like a cafe or a bar? Like, what's kind of the general, feel from people there?
Mhm. That's a good question again. So, to be very honest, I think all the knowledge around blockchain and cryptocurrency in general comes from the expat community. I'm not saying that there's not Portuguese people involved in this. You have a very good example, Diogo with Anchorage. He's back in San Francisco now, but he's running a really successful business around blockchain. I think they just raised a ton of money again this year. Um, but the average Portuguese person, they won't know much about it. Of course, these are complex topics, but the thing is, it's powered mostly by the expat community, and it's
Okay.
getting into discussion and slowly getting into the Portuguese residents as well. But it would be hard for you to have a discussion in a coffee shop about this.
Right, right. And as far as like the surrounding countries, whether we're looking at Spain, whether we're looking at Germany, and maybe some of the efforts to, um, create some laws or regulations of Bitcoin, does any of that really affect Portugal? Given the fact that Portugal's in the EU, or not really?
That's a good question. So my answer to that is you have the typical financial centers in Europe, and this would
Right,
probably, if you want to name a few, London is probably the most important, and then you'd have Zurich. So Germany plays a role as well.
right,
And I guess when it comes to laws, either we have the European Union, so all the countries together come
right,
through with a bill, and then every country will have to adopt it eventually, or where we are right now, every country is deciding on his own. So the Portuguese government, for example, they put cryptocurrency inside, well, in the same bucket as forex, for example,
right,
financial assets, and that's why we have law on this. It's not specifically made for cryptocurrency. We
right.
just got it into a bigger bowl. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think especially with Portugal's situation, I think they do have a strategic, advantage over other countries, in Europe. So I think, protecting capital gains, so to say, protecting it from taxation is, you know, is is very, very important, to say the very least. And right now with the situation in the People's Republic of China. So all the all the major and minor, I guess you could say minors, have now migrated and went everywhere else, across the world. So since all cryptocurrency, blockchain related transactions are now prohibited, what do you think? What do you think is China's long game regarding it? Because I think regardless, they are going to be a part of the blockchain economy. The U.S., China, and probably a handful of other countries. They are probably going to, in many ways, steer, I think, the bigger direction of this. Do you think this is a way to create dips for maybe some bureaucrats over there, or do you think something else is going on? Because I don't think this is going to be permanent. Because this is obviously like maybe the third, fourth, fifth time they may have done something like this. So I'm also worried about the gains from Bitcoin, as great as they are right now. I sometimes wonder. So what if one country maybe takes the lever and puts it in the other direction? Like, will those gains go away? Though that's like one of my concerns. So I want to know what you thought about that.
To be honest, with China, it's always hard to understand. I tend to look back, and when you think about the same kind of decisions they made with imports, for example, or exports. So
right.
I think it's just a way for them to control a bit more what's going on, and eventually get a better understanding and actually have a firm position on how things will be
right.
when they actually open and it starts being free. As for what you were saying before, for sure, like if countries start going a bit back, what I think will happen is most countries will start making their own laws. And this could be, for example, you won't pay tax, or you'll pay a smaller rate if you invest in the country the gains that you make. So these kind of things happened. If you look at the profits that companies had before, not cryptocurrency related, most of these programs start to take action a couple of years after these things start happening. So with cryptocurrency, I think we're in the beginning. And I believe countries will make their own moves to attract and retain, mostly retain, because attracting it's not hard. I think the hard part is retain the gains in the country and actually have some kind of investment locally to promote the local economy.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that kind of came across my desk recently, so in Brazil, for instance, there's a law in their Congress, and I believe it's still pending, to recognize Bitcoin as a legal tender. So the same way that El Salvador did it. Do you think that means anything for Portugal, given the close, the language and historical ties between those two countries? Like, would that mean probably more business in your direction if, let's say, that goes through?
Excellent question. So before answering that, and just give you a bit of context on what's happening. So for the past years, the Brazilian currency real has been losing a lot of value. So if you look at, I don't know, today, it would be somewhere around €1 to 6.5, which if you look back, it was around 3. So it's more than double. And a lot of Brazilians are losing purchasing power in Europe because of that. So what you have been seeing is most of them, the ones that have financial capability to, is they're bringing their assets to Portugal, or they're either pursuing like golden visa kind of thing, to have real estate in Portugal, companies, you name it. So with them adopting Bitcoin, what I see happening is they're trying to protect their currency, right? So if at some point they get in a bad spot as they are now, they could have kind of an alternative so that the Brazilians don't feel losing purchasing power. That's for me, that's their play. So
yeah, I think that makes sense, and especially I think a lot of financial, I guess, analysts or news or journalists are probably on the same page when it comes to this. But when you think of economic superpowers, so let's say if you take the U.S., China, and Russia out of it, who comes behind that is usually India and then Brazil, as far as essentially the next wave of economic superpowers, especially given how large a country Brazil is and all of the natural resources. So I think it looks to me, I think they're trying to play this game at least 2 or 3 steps ahead right now. And, part of me feels they may even have a better chance of pulling this off, given the fact that, I think since El Salvador did it first, they can at least see, okay, whatever El Salvador's problems they ran into, we can at least try to prepare to avoid some of that stuff. And I think on the other hand, too, because I think it's naturally a larger country, I think with a more, they do have more natural resources, more wealth behind the country. They may be able to do some innovative things to prepare for, I guess, maybe an eventual adoption of some of that. Now, that concludes some of my questions, at least for now. I just want to give the mic to Chris, and so he can get in a few words and a few questions.
Hey, yeah. No, thank you so much. I just want to go back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of we're talking about the internet and how is it being adopted with the network effect. And I think that that's exactly what's going to be happening with Bitcoin. We're in that 1997, 1999 moment where we have around 100 million users, let's say, give or take, around the Bitcoin network around the world. And in the next, 4 years, throughout the next cycle, let's say, that's going to 10x to 1 billion people. And you have the biggest macro people in the world saying that, from Kathy at ARK Invest to Raoul Paul at Real Vision to Mike Novogratz at Galaxy Digital. These are all macro, investors that are seeing the same thing. It's like the Facebook effect. It's like it's going to grow. It's a network, and the more people that join it, it just kind of grows out like a pollination throughout the world. And that's what I find so fascinating about it is it's something that cannot be stopped. And you could talk about regulation and all these things, but at the end of the day, the more regulation you put in the way, it's just going to stifle the innovation. And that's kind of what we have going on here in America. Is it's the same thing as the internet back in the 90s. People did not understand it. They didn't understand what, an email address was. They didn't understand what a website was. They were, using a dial-up, and they couldn't see why something that takes 10 minutes to show a picture is better than looking at a picture book and, in front of them, because it took so long. It just wasn't there for most people. It was really the innovators and the people that were forward thinking that could see the potential of what we're doing right now. Netflix, live streaming, Amazon, Uber, all of these technologies, Airbnb, that bring people peer-to-peer as a platform, and a network where it's an aggregate of a lot of things. You look at how Facebook is, it's just an aggregate of you. You look at LinkedIn, it's an aggregate of your professional you. You look at the App Store, it's just an aggregate of all the apps. People want things in one spot, just like Amazon. I want to buy something, everything's in Amazon at the cheapest price it can be. And that's where everything is going to, because it's just a seamless user experience, and people want the least amount of friction. And as these solutions that we're all building start to make it into people's hands in their actual phone, that's when mass adoption is going to start to be happening. Because right now we don't have those easy interfaces and user faces. Hey, just 1 second. I'm so sorry.
No worries.
No, I totally agree with what Chris was saying. So, I was about to say, before you were talking about Brazil and India. Brazil I know much better than India, and the case is, it's a huge country. When you look at the telecom, like the packages on data plan and that you have for everyone's smartphones, it's insane the kind of add value services they have in. Like,
right.
You have Netflix, Amazon, you have all of these things aggregated to the phone. So for me, blockchain would be, or even cryptocurrency, if we talk about Bitcoin, we were talking before, it would be a really smart and easy move for them. And as Chris is saying, mass adoption will come in really easy for these guys. So
yeah,
absolutely. But Chris,
sorry about that.
No worries.
My family, they tend to forget I'm doing things sometimes, but it's all right. I mean, it's just that whole network effect, like you were saying. I didn't get to hear everything that you said. I'm sure it was along the lines of, exactly what's happened that you saw with the internet will happen with Bitcoin eventually. It takes time for adoption to happen, where some of the early innovators and adopters that are tinkering with the rails that need to be built to have that Facebook moment where grandma could pick up the phone and connect and not have to put in the website, figure out. It's just simple, intuitive, easy to use buttons that literally me and Adam call it grandma proofing. An application is where, it's so easy that your grandma's going to be able to use it. And with Coinbase, it's great for me, because even though, they custody your money and it's against kind of what you're doing with self-sovereignty of owning your own Bitcoin, it gives people an on-ramp that is very easy and intuitive. Like my mother can use it, and she has her own Coinbase account, and she watches her Bitcoin because it's something easy and intuitive that she can understand. If I tried throwing a TradingView graph in front of her, she would just be like, no, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do that, you know? So it's making those fun, easy, intuitive apps and those great, seamless user experiences and interfaces that are really going to propel what we're doing forward. And behind the scenes, people like you and us are building those solutions to bring it to the masses, because we see the value and the freedom it brings, because through blockchain and through Bitcoin, like you were saying, government corruption and all of this corruption in banks and all of this corruption through pharmaceutical companies, and all of that becomes transparent now. There's nowhere to hide. You know, all these things are recorded on the blockchain for all to see and for all to expose. So, you know, you talk about auditing the Fed. You know what I mean? The famous picture of buy Bitcoin behind Janet Yellen when she's saying we shouldn't audit the Fed. She's the Fed chairman telling Congress, no, you don't need to audit us. There's no need for you to take a look at our books. You know, we run basically give you money, but you should not be taking a look at what we do. And all the money that goes missing and the misallocation and sending text to dead people in the mail, like all of this can be solved through using Bitcoin. It's like the internet. It's a general purpose technology that can infiltrate any type of industry that you can think of and benefit in a way to add transparency and trust into whatever you're doing. Because right now you can apply the internet in what you're doing, but the transactions and the trust behind the scenes may be a little, iffy. When everything's on a blockchain and you can verify all transactions, you can verify all information that it's coming from the correct sources. I just read that Chainlink partnered with Associated Press to make sure that all of their news is valid and coming from the correct sources. So that is a step in the right direction for getting the correct information out there. Now, one could beg to differ if it's the input of that information, and who's putting that information in is another thing. But at least it's creating a trust chain and a trust net throughout the world that allow us to interact trustlessly through our phones with one another, transactions, communication, as trusted as as you can use a calculator, because it's all literally code, it's all programming, it's all got the Bitcoin and blockchain at the base layer, ensuring that those things are recorded, and if there is a snag or something happens, it's transparent enough where you can go in back, see what happened, how it could be corrected, and what you could do the next time to prevent that from happening. So that's my rant. I'm completely on board with what you're doing, and see, there's not too many people, like you said, you can't talk to the average person in Portugal about this. Same thing here in America. The average person can't really talk about this, but it's slowly becoming a little more and more. You asked 9-10 months ago at the beginning of the year if somebody knew what the NFT was or what a Bitcoin was. It was a 50% chance. Now, I would say it's an 80% chance they've at least heard of it, but they don't know, maybe not know what it does, how it works, but it's starting to really, get a buzz. And I do feel this last push was a lot of institutions getting in. It's settling in, because if you looked at a lot of the altcoins, they didn't take off like they usually do once Bitcoin hits an all-time high. So it shows it was not a lot of retail coming in. With this ETF and this recent pump, it was a lot of institutions getting in. And now I feel they're just waiting to start releasing the headlines. Okay, why is Bitcoin good? And start pumping that number up, because they have the ability to do that. They can pay off editors to write, in New York Times. They can pay off editors to do whatever they can drive the narrative whatever way they want. And if institutions are now got their bags loaded, they filled up at, between 30 and 40, and now we're sitting at 60. They're like, okay, they're just waiting to pull that button, right before holiday season, right in America, right when everything's shit's hitting the fan. They're not stupid. Like this is going to be something to behold the next few months. I feel like over the next 3 to 6 months, I feel it's going to be a complete explosion of the Bitcoin and cryptocurrency space, because in 2017 we didn't have those rails in place. Now we have a lot of those rails in place to onboard people like we're doing in El Salvador. Look at the amount of, there's more people with Bitcoin addresses on their phone than there are with bank accounts in El Salvador now. And that's what, like 2 or 3 months? That's absolutely outstanding. So I know I get to go and rant.
No worries. No worries at all.
I'll let you guys get back into it. And
no worries, Chris. Those were all good points. And in fact, who knows? One can argue, maybe your money is safer in a Bitcoin wallet than a bank at this point. I think if history has shown that. In fact, our guest in our previous episode was mentioning the situation in Russia and Ukraine after the Cold War. People were taking their money out of banks. People just don't trust banks. And also, at the same time, too, that's also why, in many ways, Russia and Ukraine has kind of taken on to Bitcoin adoption a bit better than I think other parts of the world, because I think historically, people are skeptical of banks. And if, let's say, something like Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies proven itself, I think in those two areas of the world, people are going to be very flexible to adopting something like that. And Nikitas, you were just mentioning corruption. In the U.S., there's been many scandals over the past 30 years of billions of dollars disappearing from certain parts of the U.S. government budget with no explanation. And in fact, about 20 years ago, about $1 trillion disappeared. Nobody from the Pentagon. Nobody knows where it went, and there is very little follow-up. And it seems like in the news it was kind of quashed. Relatively.
And they announced it on September 10th, 2001.
Right. So there was a lot of
the money a day before September 11th. Just so you know.
Right. So exactly. And Chris and I, we love to talk about history and things of this ilk, so to say. But it makes you wonder if something like a blockchain ecosystem was in place. This type of thing would protect people from, I guess you could say, even their own government, and even from the kind of corruption, whether it's in Portugal, whether it's in Washington D.C., whether it's anywhere, to be honest. One of the things I read about Portugal right now is that the government is trying to figure out how to classify non-fungible tokens, NFTs. Is this an asset class that maybe could be taxed, or should it be kind of left to that, to that exception where kind of capital gains in Bitcoin and cryptocurrency is? Just, leave it alone. Let's protect that from taxation. What do you think of non-fungible tokens? And what do you think about, where do you think Portugal is going to go with non-fungible tokens? Do you think they're going to be taxed, or do you think they're going to be, left alone?
Let me just go back for a second, because there was a lot of things Chris was saying.
Right, yeah.
Go back with that. So one of the good things I would like to mention is the traceability. That changes everything. So if you look back, and in Portugal, I can give you a lot of examples, and banks specifically are the best examples. Since 2010, if you look up to today, it's about 10 years. We have had an average commercial bank going down or going under every year. There are some of them that didn't go under because they were kind of rescued by the government.
Right.
But when you look at this, if you'd have something on the backbone, and I'm not talking about financial statements or whatever, because this is always tricky to look at. The presentation has its details and all of that. So if you would have something that was traceable, we could go back and see, as you were saying before, this is the problem, this is how we should proceed from now on and fix it, or at least prevent that it doesn't happen again. Another good example, I was in Greece, as you know, when we had the bailout from the European Union back in 2009 because of the meltdown, the subprime meltdown. What happened was you had the banks telling its own customers, so the whole population, that they could not withdraw more than 60 euros per day from their bank account.
Right, I remember that. Yeah.
This is insane. Like, you're not in Africa, right? So, and don't take me wrong, like, I was working for a lot of years in Angola, which has
Oh, wow.
historical ties with Portugal.
Yes.
And in Greece, you felt the same. So you have money in your bank, you want to make a payment, get money out, make a transfer, and it's not happening instantaneously. Why? Like, what's going on? So for many reasons, I agree with Chris in with what you're saying. The adoption rate is growing, and I think once people actually have a user-friendly, really easy, as we have our iPhone these days, or an app for Airbnb, as you were saying, or Uber, whatever the example is, it's going to be massive. So I just wanted to make a point there. Regarding NFTs, that's a really good question. So I was reading a couple of days back on NFTs as well, because of the general government budget being approved
Yes.
for 2022. And there's nothing there regarding that.
Oh,
To be
okay.
honest, I'm not sure, but I think what they're going to do at first, at least, is put it together with cryptocurrency. But this is just a wild guess. So nothing I read points to specific legislation on this. So far, there's not much I can share with you about Portugal.
Right. I will say though, just from what I know right now, I am bullish on Portugal. So I feel that they may just leave that one alone, at least for a while anyway. I think right now there's too much money to be made, and it makes me wonder. Maybe Portugal is going to end up finding itself better suited than the rest of Europe in the next 10 years. I think, especially with what's going on with the euro and some of the other things that are going on. I think whatever business that the rest of Europe has dropped the ball on, I think Portugal will ultimately end up getting that, especially from Latin America as well, and the close historical ties. And in fact, our company, Chris, is based out of Miami. Huge Brazilian, huge Portuguese-speaking population down there. So, a lot of money migrating towards Miami from other parts of the world, including Latin America, because A, the culture and the language is there, but B, also the right economic conditions are there. So, I look at what's going on in Miami, and Chris and I, we can go on about Miami all day, but it has literally been a huge, almost economic boom. I would say maybe it's almost like the gold rush in the late 1800s or something like that, where you just kind of see all of these ideas, companies, and resources really migrate to this one area. And if I'm looking at Europe and I think about Portugal and maybe some other small areas like in Switzerland, like Zug Valley and things like that, maybe what's going on in Miami might end up being a mirror as far as what may go on to other areas. And Chris and I would certainly like to do a lot more traveling right after all the travel restrictions are lifted. But I was wondering, in case for a future visit to Portugal, is there a certain city or area where all the startups are kind of migrating to, or is it just kind of spread out everywhere? Like, is there like a Silicon Valley of sorts, kind of in the works, in Portugal right now?
Yeah, for sure. So the country is really small, so it would be easy for you to move around between all the cities if
Right.
there were more than one. But most of it is concentrated in Lisbon.
Lisbon.
There's
Okay.
there's a good and a big, actually, tech hub developing up north in Porto as well, which is our second
Porto.
biggest
Okay.
city. But Lisbon is the place to be. Most of the American companies that have relocated to Portugal, they're in Lisbon, headquartered. They have offices, even though with COVID we were locked down.
Yes.
But Lisbon for sure, and that's where most of the business is done. You were talking about Brazil and Latin America in general.
Yeah.
We have a huge relationship with Brazil, and as well with some African countries. Angola, maybe, and
Right.
Mozambique are the best examples due to petrol and gas exploration. But yeah, definitely Lisbon.
Awesome.
We're just, if you think of and I think that's a good point. If you think about the Iberian Peninsula, so Portugal and Spain,
Yeah.
we capture pretty much all of South America. When it comes down to the Portuguese-speaking language, as you were saying, all the other countries speak Spanish, or pretty much all the other. So
Right.
most of businesses coming from Latin America, they either stop in Lisbon or Madrid.
Nice. Very nice. I think that's awesome. And Nikitas, I could pretty much consider you a friend at this point. Me and you have more or less known each other since February, and we've been keeping in touch on a regular basis. So I'm asking, do you have any plans to go to Bitcoin 2022 next year?
Not, I don't know if we can travel. Maybe
Right.
maybe we could do it. This year it was hard because of the travel restrictions.
Right.
And I'm not sure if I told you at this point, but I have a Canadian passport, so I should be able to travel to Canada. But to make the trip to America, it's a bit hard.
Oh, nice. now that is definitely a good edge to have, to say the least. That is
the travel ban has been hard because we, and for you the same. Like you can go over it. So
I think, Chris, for the most part right now here in the U.S., we're pretty much restricted to a lot of outside travel, and each state does have its own policy as far as COVID restrictions, what's required, what's not required, and things like that. So even here, it's still kind of a mess, a little bit of an issue that's kind of, I guess, hopefully, working itself out right now. And kind of you also being an entrepreneur in this space, I think for all of us, this is a really major journey in a very, very unique time in history right now. I always tell Chris, I think we're effectively going to be the World War II generation that ends up kind of saving the world. You look at what happened in the US and in Europe, it was kind of that generation of people that kind of helped rebuild society and things like that. So, I like to read a lot naturally. Are there any leaders in this space, whether they're in the US or Europe or anywhere else, that you particularly like, or just even any tech leaders in general that kind of inspire you, or maybe you kind of take ideas from?
So most of the Portuguese tech leaders for me, and the references, the unicorns we have built here. So at the moment we're at 5, and I follow them closely, mostly to know more about their journey and kind of the decisions they had to make and all of that.
Yeah.
Other than that, I follow the big ones from Silicon Valley. So Facebook, Google, Apple, those kind of.
Right. And I know that you have your hand in a lot of projects. So, that adds another level of complexity when running a business and running businesses. So if you can tell me, what are some of your biggest successes, and what are some of your biggest obstacles that you've faced along the way?
I prefer to talk about obstacles. I think you learn more from them.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
I think a very good example is a business we got going in 2019. And basically we had to shut it down last year with COVID in August 2020. This was a business focused on venues, especially big venues like airports, football stadiums, concert arenas. And it was highly relying on this type of industry and clients. And with COVID, we lasted, I don't know, we put some effort in for 3 to 6 months. That was kind of our target. As soon as we understood that this was going to last, we decided to shut down. And basically the main challenge was how we could keep bringing investment in. And we were doing no progress in the client side. We had a big team, which it was not easy to handle, but you always learn from these experiences. So
absolutely. And I think having success is always great, and success, I think, is very easy to enjoy. I think that comes natural for most people, but I do think obstacles, they can really help you become better if that's how you treat it and that's how you look at it, to say the least. So, with Chris and I, and we're putting together this blockchain, this dApp, and we have a few other projects going along. There's certainly a fair amount of obstacles we've hit along the way as well, but I think you can't put a price on, I think, going your own way with your own idea. For instance, like I will take a 20-hour day doing this than to, let's say, work at some, let's say, soulless corporation. And let's say even if it's a very generous compensation package, but I think the purpose behind doing your projects and doing your own projects, you can't put a price on, I think, the fulfillment or even the happiness that that comes from that. Like, I never look at it like, oh, I just did a 16-hour day. Like, that doesn't even cross my mind. And I think Chris, this idea is essentially the brainchild of Chris's imagination and kind of what he saw, what was going on in the hospitality industry. I don't think you can put a price on going your own way. I think the freedom is worth the risk. I think, to a lot of people. I think if you're an entrepreneur, if you're trying to do something, the freedom is definitely worth the risk. Versus kind of, I think, maybe the certainty that comes from kind of just doing a usual job and whatnot. Chris, did you want to add something to that?
I'll get off mute.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, the entrepreneur journey for me has been, something I've never done. I kind of started it 3 years ago, just learning about it, joining co-working spaces, learning like the investor journey, how do you get VC money? All of these things were just like a brand new world to me, maybe like 3 or 4 years ago, let's say. And I've kind of just been studying it and absorbing everything I can. And it's been quite an experience. It allows freedom for me. Once I step back from working my 60 to 80 hour week on weekends and late nights, 6 days a week, not being able to see my children, and started working for myself and put and focus time on myself rather than working for somebody else, that's when I started to see a lot of change in my life in terms of freedom, being able to go out, take a vacation whenever I want, be with my kids whenever I want. When you're working for yourself, you kind of create your own schedule. And, my family is very important for me. I have 2 young kids. So the last thing I want to do is get burnt out working in the hospitality industry with, there's a reason why people aren't going back to a lot of those jobs, and why there's a problem here in America is because they're abused.
It's a culture problem here.
They're overly abused. They're given long hours, bad working conditions, no breaks for eating. Like, I just, for me, I eat and stand and eat because I'm so used to just being on the run constantly. Yeah. And it's people are waking up to that. And I think a lot of people with COVID have reevaluated their lives, are stepping back, taking a look at, how they can contribute to the world rather than, contributing to somebody else's pocketbook. Because a lot of it is what I was doing for 20 years. I was constantly, working for somebody else, coming up with all these great ideas, not really getting properly compensated or bonused for it. And it's not really a lot of the fault of the small business, because a lot of the small businesses I work for were struggling themselves because of all of these like restraints on them and pressures and costs and
over-regulated, overtaxed. Inflation has been a consistent and worsening problem for 30 years. I mean, it's, these conditions are not being really fixed. So it kind of, it's kind of like the rot is kind of starting at the top here. So whether it's, regulation and policy from the government has also made it just harder for every other part of society to really exist, including small businesses. Taxes, regardless of Democrats or Republicans, taxes always go up. So I always tell people, politicians, they are not your friends. In fact, they probably go to the same country club together and then talk about, how dumb people are, while they're teeing off and stuff like that. So, as time goes on in the United States, and I know this is the same everywhere else, the economic conditions are not necessarily getting better. I've yet to see a society where taxes are actually going down as far as the West, whether it's Europe, whether it's the United States. And a lot of these things, a lot of the tax burdens and the regulation, this is placed on essentially the bread and butter of society, small businesses. Like here in the United States, 90% of businesses in the U.S. are small businesses, and ironically, they also get the least amount of help and assistance. So it really makes you wonder where the priorities are of whether it's Wall Street, whether it's Washington D.C., where I think maybe they feel that it makes sense. Like, okay, so I think these burdens need to really go on. I think the foundation of the house, it always blew my mind to say the least. There was always bailouts for the bigger players, but there was never really a bailout for the small business in the United States. Now, whether this is during the lockdowns or whether this is even back in 2008, there was no real bailout, for those folks. Now, there was the PPP loans. Those are loans. So, regardless,
they also got gobbled up by big corporations before a lot of the small businesses could even get their hands on it.
Right.
You know what I mean? And Shake Shack took a lot of shit because here you are, Shake Shack, one of the biggest, burger companies in America.
Yeah, franchises in America.
You took your share before any small business did.
Right.
Yeah. Luckily, they gave it back and realized, hey, oh God, geez, this is a bad PR. But they were ready to take that money right before anybody else because they were lawyered up. They had the money.
Right.
Small businesses don't have that. You know what I mean?
Right. And they don't have that type of.
It just infuriates me, and that's kind of why we're building what we're building. Is
right. If you go around New York City, like Chris and I, when we first actually met in person, back in April. You can go down a lot of these streets. And by the way, it is weird enough to begin with to see New York City totally empty. That is weird. That is only something you saw in movies and starting last year. Streets are just like no people. So, but it was interesting. Walking down some of the streets, you see a lot of boarded up restaurants. And all you see left are Starbucks, McDonald's, Panera Bread, Chipotle, and I'm looking at this like this must be a huge windfall for all these guys. Like these guys must have been killing it this year because now all their competition is freaking done. And just to be a restaurant in New York City, a small business restaurant, you got to be paying like $30,000 plus up front just to exist, and that's even before profits. That's even before paying salaries and income to all your employees. That's even before paying all the insurance. So it's like. It almost seems like, Nikitas, this is almost like a controlled demolition right now. I really do feel that way. And I think one of the philosophy that we have here is that some of the most special moments in life are celebrated over a meal. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, weddings, anniversaries, birthdays, business deals, all different types of celebrations. And I think, I do think, the Paneras and the McDonald's of the world, they rob, I think, that experience from dining. People have their best memories a lot of times at like some of the small little mom and pops restaurants, growing up. And for me, some of the ones I saw here in New Jersey, they're gone. These are places I went to as a kid, as a teenager, when I was in college. And I'm like, they're not there anymore. And in some cases, I've seen. I've seen, like, let's say a Chili's there instead, or I've seen a Cheesecake Factory there instead, or something like that. And listen, don't get me wrong. Every now and then Cheesecake Factory and Chili's is fun to go to, but I don't want that replacing everything. I don't think anybody really wants that, replacing everything. And by the way, Portugal, amazing food, amazing steaks, amazing wine. Like, God forbid, I would not want to see like corporate steakhouses replacing all the great food in Portugal and all the great wine and all that. Yeah, exactly. So, like for me, I love food. Chris loves food. We're really thinking about the future of food. I'm like, oh no, this can't be reduced to like a few franchises. We got to do something here. So that was that's our personal feeling. And just on a last note too, I was reading in Portugal that now some of the major football leagues, soccer leagues, are now coming out with their own non-fungible tokens. What do you think about that?
It's really interesting. I was about to speak about that before, then we moved on. But we have, I think the most interesting NFT we have here regarding football is not from a football club actually, but from a company that has. I'm not sure how it's called back in the US, but you have like a fantasy league around.
Fantasy league. Yeah, we call it the same thing.
Cool.
Yeah.
So the company that has the main fantasy league for the Portuguese, similar to the MLS, right, the championship.
Right.
I think they had it for not even 12 hours. So they sold 3 million euros worth in less than 12 hours.
Wow.
Which which is it's crazy. Like when we were saying the average Portuguese wouldn't know anything about NFTs, wouldn't be able to discuss it with you or anything, but then there you go. You have one company coming out with a product, and
Wow.
in less than a day, it all goes away.
It
So
just sells out like that. And that's
yeah.
incredible. Yeah, I think the future of NFTs are going to be strong. And I wonder sometimes maybe NFTs are really going to be the vehicle to really introduce most people to blockchain. Because there is something, you look at NFTs, there's some sort of face, there's some sort of logo, there's some
Mhm.
sort of like some bit of entertainment that's connected to it. Let's say Nike has an NFT, people automatically understand that. That's Nike. They're selling really a hyper expensive piece of content, but I think that might be the bridge to start the journey for most people to start understanding this. It might actually be through NFTs, versus maybe, let's say, blockchain or something like that. But listen, Nikitas, it was an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Me and you have been speaking together for most of the year. Chris and I, we hope to make it to Portugal, especially once the travel restrictions are lifted. We hope you can come to Miami too once the travel restrictions are lifted as well. And listen, we hope you have an awesome weekend. I'll definitely be talking with you over the next few weeks as far as what we're up to and some of the things that we have in mind. And I'm looking forward to seeing how blockchain and NFTs and Bitcoin plays out in Portugal. I think I think Portugal it may be ahead of the curve here as far as the rest of Europe, and I'm really looking forward to seeing them succeed.
Thanks for
Same
having
here.
me, guys. It was a pleasure. For sure, we'll keep in touch, and hopefully
Absolutely.
we can meet face to face as well. That would be
We
great.
will. We absolutely will. And listen, Nikitas,
Thank
have
you.
an awesome weekend. And we'll be speaking very soon, and we'll definitely be touching base a lot over the next few weeks and months.
Have a good weekend, guys.
You too.
Bye.
Take care.